So I'm Pascal, and I'm a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart. And today's talk will be mostly about Dart. I'm coming from Germany, Cologne, and I personally work as a freelancer as well as a coach. So I'm not only developing apps in Flutter, I'm also giving workshops about Flutter. And if you are interested in learning more about Flutter, get your team a quick start with your Flutter applications or get some in-depth material, contact me and I can give you a workshop anywhere. Today I want to talk about kt.dart, and kt.dart is a library I came up with after I worked a lot with Dart and with Flutter after coming from Kotlin. And for me, coming from Kotlin to Dart was a few steps back. So I was a Dart developer for a long time. So I started Dart very early when I'm coming from Java to Dart. Dart was fantastic. But then I learned Kotlin a lot. I was very engaged with Kotlin and I used it a lot. Going back to Dart, because Flutter came up, it was a pain for me. And the whole idea was how can I help the community, the Dart community, to make it more like Kotlin, to have all the fun in it. And this talk here is all about how came I up with this idea and what are the challenges creating this library. So yeah, first of all, yes, this is a Flutter meetup, and I think everyone here is pretty sad and knows that Dart is a great language and why they chose Dart, but I want to repeat this. And I love Kotlin, but we cannot change Dart, and I explain why. So the coolest thing about Dart is that Dart has two compilers. One just-in-time compiler, which is very old. It was used when they tried to replace JavaScript in the web, and one ahead-of-time compiler, which they have been building for Flutter especially, so that they can ship applications to the app store from Apple. And this is pretty unique of all programming languages. Mostly, for example, Kotlin only has an ahead-of-time compiler. JavaScript, on the other hand, with React Native has a just-in-time compiler. And they use the same in production and in development. Recently, and I think last week, there was a big announcement of Dart to native with Dart 2.6. And until this release, it wasn't able to compile your pure Dart application down to machine code. This was already used in the Flutter infrastructure, and it was used when you're compiling your application in release mode, but it wasn't exposed for Dart developers. And now they delivered it, and you can now execute your Dart program with Dart or with Dart to native, compiling it down to a native executable and executing that. So now we have AOT even for Dart projects. Just-in-time compilation allows fast development. That's why I really love Dart. I love that I have so quick cycles between writing code and seeing it on the screen. But I also love the speed when I build my applications in release mode. And sometimes you see stutters if you run your application in debug mode, but in ahead of time, I rarely see any stutters at all. Another reason why they chose Dart is because Dart has this single thread of execution. By default, Dart only uses a single thread. And if you want to have more threads running things in parallel, you have to use isolates. And every isolate has its own event loop. And the only way they can communicate with each other is with messages. Whereas in other languages, you have threads, for example, and those threads can have shared memory. The big problem with shared memory between threads is that you need to lock sometimes, or you run in deadlocks and things like that. And by design with Dart, you cannot have any deadlocks. You do not have shared memory, which is weird in some cases, and it feels odd if you're not used to it. But for example, on the Erlang VM, they are so used to this actor model, they don't miss shared memory at all. And it's a problem if you're coming from the Java world with threads and shared memory, but it's not a problem. You can solve every problem with those isolates. And yeah, the garbage collection is also much faster because you don't have the shared memory. And at the end, Dart will not go away. I know I love Kotlin, but we will never see Flutter with Kotlin in the near future. So let's make the best out of it, embrace Dart, make Dart a better language. And yeah, we cannot change it, so let's embrace it. Let's talk a bit about Kotlin's strength. And Kotlin has so many features and they are just good. They make Kotlin a great language, better than C, obviously. So I like to go through those features now and see how can we make Dart as good as Kotlin. Yeah, and my personal question was when I saw that list and had this list in mind, how can I personally help just a developer writing Dart code, making the ecosystem of Dart better and making the whole language better? So let's start. Function types, that's something we already have in Dart, nothing to do. Same goes for coroutines. We have futures, they are pretty similar, nothing to do from my side. Type inference smart cars, they are right now better in Kotlin, but there are some smart cars in Dart as well, and the team is actively working on that to make it even better. So if you have an if and one property is true in this one case, it's automatically false in the other one, and things like that already work, and they are working to make this even better. Also, string interpolation, that's something which is there since Dart 1.0, nothing to do from me. And operator overloading. I think Dart was one of the first languages which actually introduced it, that you can overload the plus operator, for example. It works in Dart, but Kotlin has some more operators which are overridable or overloadable. Maybe the Dart team can extend this, but it works so far okay. Now let's talk about some features I cannot help with. And this is, for example, non-nullable types. I'm just a dumb Dart developer or Flutter developer. I have no idea how to write compilers. So I cannot help with that. And the only thing I can do is raise issues, do some communication with the Dart team, but that's it. Push them. They need to be pushed at some point. Same goes for data classes. I cannot help with that. I can only give recommendations. Please add them as fast as possible. We really need them. And it looks like non-nullable types are coming pretty soon. And the same goes for data classes in the near future. Shorter lambdas. If you're coming from JavaScript or TypeScript, you're like, whoa, cool. In Dart, I can use the same short lambdas and you're fine. If you're coming from the Kotlin world, you're thinking like, oh, this boilerplate code. All the time you have to write those braces and no one wants to do this. But I also cannot help with that. This is a language feature which requires compiler work. Yeah, and no semicolons. Yeah, cannot help with that, sorry. If you want to know what the team is actually currently working on, you can check out the Dartlang language repository and go to the projects there. And right now they are working on non-nullable types and they are working on static extension methods, which, surprise, were released in the last Dart release 2.6 last week. They're still in being implemented because there are some cases which do not work, but this will be closed really soon. If we look into the issues of that project, for example, data classes, this is one of the most liked features or issues there. And it's on the radar. This will come soon, but first let's get our extension methods, then we get the data classes, and yeah, it takes some time. And the non-nullable types will be in between. So first non-nullable types, then data classes. Optional semicolons. It's pretty high rated, but the team gave some information that they're not currently looking into it. There are some cases where they cannot fit it in the grammar of Dart, and it would be a very breaking change at some points. So there are easier ways to improve Dart than just removing semicolons. It's not that helpful to remove semicolons. It's better if they work on real language features. And the optional parentheses for the arguments in the lambdas, that's not very high rated, but in the comments here, we can see that the team actually thinks that, yeah, this is a good thing and it's very easy to implement. So this could be added in the near future. So from that list, the only thing I personally can help with is with immutability, because Kotlin has immutable data structures by default, and the tons and tons of useful extension functions which exist in the Kotlin standard library. And I can port them to Dart as well, because they are so useful and I use them every day. So let's see what I mean by immutable data structures and how they can help. So here I wrote a bad API, and I say it's a bad API, but if you look at existing Dart APIs, most APIs look like this. The big problem here is there's a function called getScopes, and it returns a list of string or whatever. It doesn't matter. This list, this returned list, by default is a mutable list. So if you just return it, it's a mutable list. And as an external user of that API, you can just add an item to it. And the author of the API does not know what to do with it. Maybe to add an item to that list, you have to set up some listeners and stuff like that, but you can add it. There are ways to prevent this. For example, there's a list.immutable. Please correct me if that's not wrong. It's not immutable, it's unmodifiable. Yeah, I always forget that. So you can create an unmodifiable list, but it has still the list functionality or the list interface, which means it gives you an add function. It gives you a remove function, which throw at runtime. But as a developer, as a dumb developer, you see, oh, I have a list, I can add something to it, and you try it and you fail at runtime. And that's pretty bad. It would be much better if you would use something like a kt list here. That's actually part of the kt.dart library. And the kt list by default is immutable. It gives you tons of options or tons of operators on that list, but all of that is either read-only or it creates a copy. So there is a function which lets you add an element, but it returns a copy and does not mutate the original list from that API. And I'm kind of a API guy or an SDK guy. In the past, I wrote many SDKs, and this is very helpful if you use immutable data structures everywhere in your public API. So let's look a bit at what we have now and what we should have. At the top, you see some Kotlin code. You create a list with this list of function. It's a top level function. You do not have any list literals in Kotlin. And then you can call a function, for example, here associate by, which basically creates a map out of that list. And we can port this function, which is associate by, already to Dart. It's just pure logic. So I can create a top level function, which is called associate by, which maps this list with a lambda to a map. And it works. It doesn't look great because I have to put the list as first parameter and I cannot call associate by on that list. But I can port the functionality. And so the second step was how it was working before they introduced extension methods. But I already knew that on the horizon, there will be extension methods in the long term. So the thing at the bottom will be possible in the future. And my goal was, okay, let's port the associate by and all the other extension functions first to Dart. And when we finally have extension functions, I can just convert them to extension functions and we're pretty much set. Another thing I saw as a problem is that usually if you work with those extension functions, especially on collections, you tend to chain them a lot. So here I call associate by and then filter keys, and it can go on and on and on. if you use the syntax with top-level functions, you have to nest those functions inside, and you're not anymore reading left to right, so associate by and then filter, but instead you're reading filter, associate by, and you basically have to read from the inside out to understand the code which is there. Yes. Correct, the code here is wrong, at least the output, yes. Yes. One way to solve this problem, so first I started porting those static functions, so static top-level functions, but I then found out that if I just extend the existing list, the existing map, I could just add those functions and you could chain them as you would normally do. It's a bit of work, but it works. And I went initially with this way. It's not called my list and my map, but it's called my kt list and kt map. Cool so far. So we can port the functionality from Kotlin pretty much to Dart. Although you have to use different lists, and every time you get a pure Dart list, you have to first convert it to a Kotlin list or my list here in this case, and then work with those extension functions. Yeah. So my initial plan, and this was over a year ago, was first port all the cool extension functions from Kotlin to Dart one-to-one, and finally now today convert everything to extensions. But then I thought about immutability, and immutability in Kotlin is pretty cool, especially in the data structures. So you have here the hierarchy of the different data structures for list, set, and map. And list, set, and map, for example, are immutable by default, and they have a mutable counterpart. So list is not mutable, you cannot add and remove items, but mutable list is mutable, and you can add, remove items, do whatever you want. And if we look at the same diagram for Dart, it looks a bit simpler, and I'm not happy with that. We only have lists and set and map, and those are mutable by default. There are no immutable data structures, and this helps me so much when I write Kotlin code that I thought, okay, let's also port immutable data structures to Dart and make mutable versions as well. The big problem with those functions, and here I showed this method with list.unmodifiable. If you create a list like that in Dart, you can still call remove. There is no compiler warning, but at runtime it fails. And when I ported the immutable data structures to Dart, this is not possible. So here I'm using kt-list_off, which creates a list of objects, and this is automatically an immutable data structure. And I cannot remove items. If I try to call the remove method, it will say the remove method does not exist because the interface kt-list does not have a remove function. And I think that's much better. You should only give APIs out which actually work. And that's why I created mutable data structures and immutable data structures as well. Another thing I found is that if you have lists or any collection in Dart, it does not compare the contents of that list. It only checks by equality. So if we have here two lists, they are created, they are not created once, but twice. This is 2 times the same list, but it has a different reference. They are not the same with Dart. They are not equal because Dart lists only check if it's the same reference, not if the content is the same. And if I use my list_off functions from kt.dart, I can create functions which are, or I can create collections, lists in this case, which are actually equality, or which can be checked by equality and not only by identity. And that's a big win, especially if you write domain logic and you have your domain objects in your application. At some points you want to compare them, you want to see if something is in a list, and you don't care if that object was copied or not. It's only about the content, not about where this object was created. There are other things, quite a lot of code. we have two lists on top, and if I compare them by equality, false. Yes, they are not equal. It's not the same reference. There is a way to fix this by calling list equality dot equals and call that function, and it gives you true if those lists have the same content. Here at the bottom, I created two maps, and the same thing should be true for maps because there's map equality, and you can call map equality equals on those two maps, and it turns out those are not equal. And this frustrated me because the reason to that is that I have to use deep collection equality because my maps also contain lists. So you can see here maps and they contain lists. If it would not contain lists, map equality would work. But now it contains lists and I have to use deep equality. The big problem here is if you use generators, code generators to generate your data classes in Dart, they will see, oh, this is a list, I should use list equality. And if you later add another property to your objects, which is another collection, another list, another map, whatever, this equality check doesn't work anymore. So you really have to know what's inside of that object to compare it. And for me, that's just wrong. So with kt.dart, that all is solved. If you use kt.dart collections, they work as you would expect this to work in Kotlin, for example. They compare by content all the time. There is this in Kino application out there in open source. It's a Kino application for Finnish Kinos. Finnish, yes. And it was also using the normal lists, and because it's a Redux application, there are a lot of comparisons between, are these objects the same? Is it the same thing? And all data classes in this project override the equality method and have a custom equality check. I refactored this application to use kt.dart collections, and I could remove all iterable equality checks at all and just replace them with normal equals checks. And depending on which generator you use for to create those data classes, sometimes they just offer you the equality checks. So if you're new to Dart and you're not used to this equality thing, you would see, oh yeah, it compares two lists, that's fine, that should work. But it does not work with pure Dart lists. It only works with other lists. For example, build lists, they have the same logic. If you're using those, fine. But with kt-list, you have the same thing. And also for hash code. So equality and hash code, they work together hand in hand. It's the same thing. After I understood that Dart has different collections than I was used to in Kotlin and in Java, I came up with this diagram. So at the top, we have mutable collections, which don't compare the contents. And in Java, we call them arrays. And I was asking myself, okay, what are arrays in Dart? And there is no array in Dart because arrays in Dart are lists. So it's not surprising that the lowest level collection of elements does not check for the equality of the contents because it's just an array in other languages. It's just called list in Dart. And the counterpart, for example, in Java, what is a list in Java? It's a superset of an array. It checks for the equality and things like that. But that thing does not exist in Dart yet. And when I realized that there is a missing part, I saw that, yes, with kt.dart, I actually created collections which solve a problem. And everyone here who wrote Dart or Kotlin code were using lists. Nobody here creates arrays in their data objects or in their domain logic. We all work with lists there. So why not work with a similar kind of collection in Dart? And I told you before, I created custom collection classes, kt-list. And I initially thought they are only there to make the API better so that you can chain methods after each other. But now I saw, no, those classes bring even more value because they care about equality. So this is the whole list of collection which exists right now in kt.dart. We have a kt list set, kt list. We have a mutable kt list, and the same goes for map and set. There's even kt collection and kt iterable. Sometimes you have to use those, but usually you start by creating a list, and then some property will generate you an iterable and things like that. So only the first three things are the ones you actually create yourself. Yeah, and now kt.dart is born, and I now want to give you more insights about what I learned writing this library. It was not only that I solved the problem, I learned a lot about the Kotlin standard library. I read every line of code in the meantime, and I learned a lot about Dart itself. And I want to give you all my learnings as well. So first of all, I started with two different kind of ways to construct kt collections. The one here on the right, on the left, is how a Kotlin developer would create a list. So a Kotlin developer would use the function list_of and puts all the elements there. Whereas a developer of any other language would use a collection literal or use the constructor. And I personally use those top-level functions a lot. But as I was researching in open source projects and everything which was available on GitHub and all the people which are using kt.dart out there, they seem to use the constructors. I don't know why, but everyone is using the other side, and maybe I have to adapt as well. Really, nobody uses those top-level functions, so maybe I should get rid of them. I discovered that Dart has no var args, and this is a problem because I want to have a function which is called list_of, and then I want to have comma separated all my values, and I want not to create a method which is called list_of and you put in a list. That's pretty bad because now you create basically two lists. Not so cool. So this is actually the source code of kt.dart, and this is a helper construct. So basically I created a method with tons of arguments, 10, and I called this method args_to_list. And with args_to_list, this is the source code. It's not nice, but it works. It checks for the first null value in that list and cuts the list there and creates the list with the values which are non-null. So we have kind of a problem here. If you were using this list_of function, you cannot put null values inside, because if it sees a null value, it stops the list there. Another reason why we need another constructor. So now I have one more constructor. I have this list_of constructor where you can put non-null values. And I have this kt list from where you can put a Dart list and convert that Dart list to a kt list, because a Dart list can have null values inside. You should never put nulls in a list. That's why I don't think it's a big problem. But this is how you can construct any list with any content. Another problem was that maps have key value pairs, but this thing of a key value pair, so key, column, and then the value, this is not a type in Dart. In Kotlin, key to value is a pair, and having a list of pairs creates a map. This does not work in Dart. And so if you would just write a key value pair in Dart, it's invalid code, because this is only valid inside of a map construct or using the map literals. So the only thing I can solve this is by using kt_map from and not offering a kt_map of, where you can just put those pairs. It simply doesn't work. Again? Yes, map entry, that's actually true. So if you have a map and you can call entries on that and you get map entries, but this thing is not a map entry. This construct here for the compiler is not a map entry. Yeah, so I was hoping as well that I can just create a list of map entries, but it doesn't work. Yeah. And also creating a map entry is pretty hard. So there's no cool syntax. So you would you have to call the constructor of map entry, which also is not public. Another problem. I ran into a problem because my kt iterable actually does not extend the Dart iterable. In kt iterable has tons of functions, but I did not like all the functions which exist in the Dart iterable. For example, where. This cool where functions, I did not like it. I like to call it filter like in any other language. So I did not extend iterable, but for Dart, it is required to extend iterable to iterate over items with the for loop. So on top, you see a normal list, and I can iterate over it. And at the bottom, if I create a kt list, I cannot iterate over it. And I get an error that I do not implement iterable. The problem to this, oh yeah, first of all, the reason behind this. This here is Kotlin code. And in Kotlin, we have a pretty slim iterable interface. It only has one method, which gives you an iterator. And the iterator has two other methods, has next and next. And with that, you can iterate over everything. With Dart, the iterable interface has 30 methods. That's a lot. And I had to implement all of them. Not that it would be hard, but if they add a new method, it would be a breaking change because I have to extend my iterable as well. And as I already told you, I do not like some of these methods. So I ended up with creating my own iterable. And to solve this for loop problem, I created a property called .iter. And now we can iterate over kt lists. And that's the one big catch. There's no other problem you run into if you're using kt collections. That's the only thing you have to know. Iterating with a for loop requires the .iter property. Now with Dart 2.6, we finally have extension method. It was released last week, and I could start converting all my existing functions to extension functions. Right now, I did not implement I did not port these extension functions, which I wrote for my kt collections, to normal Dart collections. And I'll tell you why. It has to do with interopt. And I think right now, the interoperability between Dart collections and Kotlin collections is pretty good. If you start with a Dart collection, you can just call .kt. And you automatically get a kt collection, and you can call all the cool extension functions I wrote on it. It also works the other way around. If you have to use an API which uses a Dart collection, and you have to enter a Dart collection, you can still use a kt collection and call .dart on it. And you automatically transform your kt collection to a Dart collection. So it's just .dart or .kt, and you can convert between those collections. That's why I did not choose right now to extend the list of Dart, the map of Dart, and the set of Dart. I said it before, but I like well-named functions, and especially filter. When I see people starting with Dart and Flutter, and they were coming from Kotlin or Swift, they're always looking for the filter methods. And I've seen people writing their own filter methods, basically static methods, because they did not find that there's a function called where. The same goes for other methods. For example, the expand, which is basically a flat map. Some weird namings like that. And there were also some missing functions. For example, there is a first property, but if there is no item in it, it crashes. But maybe you don't want to crash, but you want to have null instead. And there is no first or null method. So I added all of that cool extension functions to kt.dart. And this is a list. This is not a complete list. This is only for iterable. And there are more and more pages for list and map and so on. It's a really big list, and I think you can find basically any method you can think of. You might ask yourself, okay, what's inside kt.dart besides collection? And I have to tell you, not much, because collections are the core of the KT standard library. And there's not much, and it's not much worth porting because the Dart SDK is also not that bad. But I added, for example, an annotation package, and I added the nullable and non-nullable annotation. You will not get any recommendations in your IDE that, oh, this thing can be null like in Java, but non-nullable types are coming to Dart soon. And you should prepare your code right now. So whenever you think, oh, the return type here is list, but it could also be null, add a nullable annotation. And once non-nullable types are landing, you can easily convert that code because you know exactly, oh, at that point it can be null, so I should convert it to a nullable type. And at that point it cannot be null, it should be non-nullable. I also plan to create a test package. I'm currently not happy with the assertions in Dart. This expect construct is not type safe and it has some problems. But I ended up not putting it inside kt.dart because it's not really related to that. And it also works perfectly as a standalone package. Haven't released it yet, but if you're interested, follow me on Twitter and I will release it in the near future. Talking about the future, so what's the future of kt.dart? First of all, I got tons of feedback from users of that, and they really want those extension functions also for Dart collections. No matter if they are mutable or not, they just want to create a Dart list with this collections literal and call flatmap on it. Yeah, I always tell, yeah, just use interop, call .kt.flatmap. It works the same way, it's fine. But they were not happy about that. I don't know why. So there is a new package and it's called DartX. It's not my package, although I'm a contributor there. It was created by Simon Lyer. He is a student currently from Munich, and he basically ported all the extension functions from Kotlin to Dart collections. It's super funny because he did not know about kt.dart, and our packages look very, very similar. But that's only because we basically copied the code of Kotlin and just converted it to Dart. So it's pretty funny, and it was pretty easy for me to get started in that package because of the same structure and the same code basically. And I started adding functions which were missing as well. And so can you. So this package is pretty new. It's now, I think, a month old, but it already covers like 90% of all cool extension methods which exist in Kotlin. That's the next slide. So DartX not only has extensions for collections, but DartX also has extensions for string and int and others. I did not put more extensions into kt.dart because I don't want it to create a kt string and a kt int. At some point it gets crazy, and it also doesn't bring any value because string is also immutable and I don't have to create a new class for it. So I was looking forward to extension methods being released, and then I can create extensions for kt.dart on the pure Dart classes. But it turns out there's another package which solves exactly that. So why not use this? And with DartX, you get tons of other extensions for other types. For example, for I/O, if you do networking requests, there are extensions for that as well, or reading files. You still run into problems that you expose mutable types. Yeah, you have to live with that or use kt.dart at that point. There are some cool features in DartX. For example, on top, flatten, that's something which also exists in kt.dart, but now you can flatten pure Dart list with an extension function and some extensions for strings. So one thing I was really missing is that I could not get the characters of a string. I always get ints with the pure Dart functions, but now you can just call .chars and you get characters, one-digit strings or one characterized strings out of it. A cool API I personally added is the range2 method. And I did not add this to kt.dart because it just works with Dart types. And you can basically call range2 on any integer, give another value inside, and you can then iterate over that collection. It also has a step, so you can have different step sizes and things like that. And it was pretty fun writing that code. It looks pretty trivial, but if you're writing it, you run into cool corner cases. So now the advice, when to use what. kt.dart works perfectly if you are writing APIs and SDKs. So never expose immutable lists, expose immutable lists. And I think right now there are only 2 libraries providing you immutable collections. This is a build list or build collections and kt.dart. And you have to choose what to use. The Dart collections will never go away. It's the core of the Dart SDK, but we can make better or make the API better and make working with it easier. And that's what DartX is for. So if you use the Dart collections, add DartX to your project. Basically, everybody add DartX to your project. And if you're missing something, add it to DartX yourself. It's super easy. Now, of course, there's this question, should I deprecate kt.dart now that we have extensions and DartX? And yeah, there's not much in kt.dart anymore. The only thing kt.dart offers are immutable data types, and it offers it really well. And I think that's, unless the Dart team comes up with immutable collections, we should use a library for immutable collections. And this is what kt.dart is for. One problem or one idea I had is that I basically deprecate kt.dart and create an immutable collection library. The problem here is this iterable thing. I cannot create real iterables by not extending iterable. And unless the Dart team comes up with a way for me to create iterables without implementing 30 methods, I will not solve this. And both of these things, immutable collections directly in Dart and opening iterables for third parties, will not happen very soon. We will first see optional semicolons before this will happen. So kt.dart is ready to use. It is stable. You can use it now, and it will be stable for a long time, and it will have support for a long time as well. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I know that we are living in times where you have like a gigs of memory. You have like multiple CPUs, but what is the performance footprint of kt.dart and DartX?
The one missing slide or the one slide I was missing. DartX has no footprint. So with Dart, we have tree shaking. So at runtime, even if you add a huge library, but you only use one single function, that single functions will be added to the release. So there's no footprint in that case. The overhead, so there's also no memory overhead. The only thing with kt.dart, because it has immutable collections, it has to copy the list you give in initially to make it really immutable. Otherwise, you would still have a reference, and that's bad. So that's the only overhead which exists. Any more questions?
So you said that you didn't implement the optional, so non-nullable types in Java world, and with Google libraries, you had this optional thing, optional object. Is it something like that in DartX?
I think it can. Good idea. Open an issue and try it. Yeah, haven't thought about it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. If you have more questions. Yeah, one more. it was more like, yeah, you can do it. It's a language. It's cool, and cool that we finally have immutable data types. But they were not looking forward to improving the iterable interface, making it leaner and much smaller, because they don't see the need right now. Yeah.
Have you tried to push any features to the language itself?
Yes, I did create. So for all bugs I had and for all inconveniences I had, I created issues. Did not receive very much feedback. Yeah, I'm constantly pushing them. Whenever I see them in person, I'm saying, yeah, make it better, make it more like Dart, Kotlin. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Pascal.